Hello and welcome to the Manifested e-learning platform. Today we continue with the subject Advanced Public Financial Management. We are starting on topic number 5, which is public sector investment and enterprise management. This chapter has 5 sub-chapters, namely 1, establishment and dissolution of state corporations and public investments. 2, monitoring performance and statutory reporting for public investments. 3, the role of the National Treasury in management of public enterprises. 4, comparative analysis of State Corporation Act and Companies Act in Kenya. Then lastly, challenges affecting state corporations in Kenya. We will be taking a subtopic one at a time. Today we begin with the establishment and dissolution of state corporations and public investments. These are two things: state corporations and public investments. We'll be studying the establishment and dissolution of state corporations. Then we will analyze establishment and dissolution of public investments. We begin with state corporations. How are state corporations established? How are they dissolved? Now, in Kenya, the establishment of state corporations and dissolution and the governance of public investments are primarily guided by specific legal frameworks designed to ensure accountability, transparency, and prudent use of public resources. So state corporations are a significant part of Kenya's public sector. That has to be taken note of. State corporations are a significant part of the public sector. Significant part of the public sector, established to perform specific functions. State corporations are established to perform specific functions on behalf of the government. And their establishment and dissolution are primarily governed by the State Corporations Act and other relevant legislation. State Corporations Act, governed by the State Corporations Act. The State Corporations Act. State Corporations Act. So now, establishment may be by presidential order. Establishment. They may be established by presidential order. The president may order the establishment of a state corporation. And that is Section 3 of the Corporations Act, which empowers the president to establish a state corporation as a body corporate by order published in the Gazette. And this order specifies the functions of the newly established corporation. State corporations may also be established by an act of parliament. The parliament may also enact an act to establish a state corporation. Some state corporations are established directly by specific acts of parliament that define their mandate, powers, and governance structure. 3, under the Companies Act. The Companies Act. A company incorporated under the Companies Act, where the government owns the whole of its controlling majority of shares of stock, or which is a subsidiary of a state corporation is also considered a state corporation under the State Corporations Act. So the State Corporations Act recognizes a company that is formed under the Companies Act whose majority shareholding, a company that is wholly owned by the government, is also considered as a state corporation. All right? And once established, a state corporation is a body corporate with perpetual succession. Once a state corporation is established, it is considered a body corporate with perpetual succession, capable of suing and being sued in its corporate name, and capable of holding and alienating movable and immovable property subject to the provisions of the State Corporations Act. And ministerial responsibility for each state corporation is assigned by the president to a cabinet secretary. By the president to a cabinet secretary. So this is how state corporations are established. Number one, by a presidential order. Number two, by an act of parliament and the Companies Act. Dissolution. Now, the dissolution of a state corporation involves a legal process to bring its existence to an end. To dissolve is to bring the existence of a state corporation to an end. And that can occur due to various reasons, including fulfillment of its objectives, a change in government policy, financial distress, and so on. So the procedures for dissolution can vary depending on how the state corporation was established. For example, for a state corporation established by a presidential order, the dissolution would typically require a formal legal process, often involving an order revoking the establishment order, or an amendment or repeal of, if it's an act of parliament, it may be through an act of parliament that created it, and so on. So the process would include settling the corporation's affairs, dealing with its assets and liabilities, and managing its employees. So that is for corporations established by a presidential order or an act of parliament. The dissolution would typically require a formal legal process. It may involve an order revoking the establishment, or an amendment to an act of parliament, or a repeal. All right? Now, for state corporations that are formed under the Companies Act, the dissolution process would largely follow the procedures for winding up companies as outlined in the Insolvency Act and the Companies Act. And this can be through voluntary winding up, that would be by members or creditors, or compulsory winding up by the court. But we know recent government initiatives have also seen cabinet approved plans for dissolution or merger of several state corporations as part of public sector reforms aimed at enhancing efficiency and reducing fiscal pressure. So all these processes necessitate careful adherence to relevant laws, and also including the laws including the State Corporations Act, the Insolvency Act, the Public Service Regulations. And the purpose here is to address issues such as asset and liability transfer, employee transition, and continuity of services. Do you understand? So that is how state corporations are dissolved. Dissolution of state corporations. Now let's move on to the public investments. We've discussed the establishment of state corporations and dissolution of state corporations. Let's move to public investments. Public investments. Establishment of public investments. Establishment of public investment. Establishment. Now, the establishment, including the dissolution of public investments in Kenya, are governed by a legal and a regulatory framework primarily anchored in the Public Finance Management Act and the Public Investment Management Regulations of 2022. And this framework aims to ensure that public resources allocated to investments are utilized efficiently, effectively, and in a transparent manner throughout the investment life cycle. So, the establishment of public investments typically follows a structured process designed to ensure that projects are well conceived, appraised for viability, and aligned with national and county development priorities. And the key stages of establishment of public investment would include the identification and prioritization. Let me put that down. Stages. Let me have the stages here. 1, identification and prioritization. The public investment projects are first of all identified based on national or county development plans, such as the medium-term plans or the county integrated development plans, and even the sector-specific strategies. And this stage involves identifying the needs and the potential interventions to address them. So prioritization is crucial given limited resources. Because of limited resources, prioritization then becomes crucial and is often guided by criteria such as alignment with policy objectives, the potential impact, and feasibility. Then we have project preparation. Project preparation. This is a critical stage that involves detailed analysis of proposed projects, and the public investment management regulations emphasize a standardized approach to project cycle management, including the concept note preparation, the pre-feasibility studies, the feasibility studies, the project appraisal. We also may have selection, and so on. So first of all, we have the project preparation and appraisal. At the appraisal stage, we have the concept note preparation, the pre-feasibility studies, and the feasibility studies, including project appraisal. Then the third phase is the selection for budgeting. Selection for budgeting. Now, based on the outcomes of the appraisal process, because the last stage in project preparation is the appraisal. Appraisals. Projects are appraised. There is a comprehensive review of feasibility study and other relevant information by dedicated units such as the public investment management units at the National Treasury to assess the project's readiness for implementation and its alignment with public investment management principles. That is what happens at the project appraisal. Then based on the outcome of the appraisal process and within the context of the medium-term expenditure framework at the national county fiscal strategy paper at the county level, viability and prioritized projects are selected for inclusion in the national budget or county budget. That's what we are referring to as selection for budgeting. And that involves aligning the project's funding requirements with the available fiscal space. Then we have budget approval, selection for budgeting, then we have budget approval. Now, the proposed public investments as part of the broader national or county budget estimates are submitted to Parliament or respective county assembly for consideration and approval through the annual appropriation bill. So there is need for legislative approval, which provides the legal authority to commit public funds to those investments. Then 5, legal authorization. Legal authorization, and even we can sum it up with implementation. Legal authorization and implementation. Now, once the budget is approved and the necessary appropriations are in place, the legal framework for specific investment is finalized, which may involve specific project agreements or even legal notices. And the relevant government entity or the implementing agency then proceeds with the detailed design, procurement, and execution of the project. So that is the stages involved in establishing public investments. Public investments. You understand? Yes. Now, that was very important for you to understand the stages, candidates. But let's now move on to the establishment and dissolution, the legal aspect. That was the establishment, candidates, of public investments. We have seen the stages of establishing as public investments. So we can now move on to dissolution. Dissolution of public investments. Now, the dissolution or winding down of public investments can occur for various reasons, including the completion of a project, the cessation of its relevance or viability, or just as part of a broader institutional reforms. For example, the dissolution or merger of state corporations. So the process for dissolving depends on the nature of the public investments. For example, for projects, for a specific infrastructure project, dissolution would typically involve the completion of its life cycle. If a project is no longer viable or necessary before completion, a decision may be made to terminate it. And the Public Finance Management Act and relevant regulations would govern the procedures for managing the remaining assets and liabilities associated with the terminated project. So that is for projects. Because public investments could just be projects which have a life, they have a lifetime. But we may have public entities. We may also have public entities. How are public entities dissolved? Or what sometimes called state corporations. Now, when a public investment is structured as a state corporation or other public entity, its dissolution is a more formal legal process. the government and the dissolution and the establishment and dissolution of state corporations are governed by the State Corporations Act and can also be influenced by the provisions in the Public Finance Management Act. So that is how public investments are dissolved. It could be through the State Corporations Act or the PFM Act. And the process typically involves the decision to dissolve. It may also involve the legal process. So a policy decision has to be made by the government. That is the cabinet at the national level to dissolve the entity, often based on performance reviews, changes in policy, or even financial unsustainability. After a decision to dissolve is made, then the dissolution requires a legal process which may involve an act of parliament or winding up process initiated under relevant laws. And we have the Insolvency Act, which provides frameworks for winding up companies which can be adapted for dissolution of state corporations, particularly in cases of insolvency. So that's all candidates for establishment and dissolution of state corporations. We've discussed the establishment of state corporations and the establishment and dissolution of public investments. There are two things: the establishment and dissolution of state corporations and establishment and dissolution of public investments. Thank you. God bless you. Bye-bye.